So, formality first, let me introduce myself. My name is Paolo Foggi. I'm a medical oncologist by training, and I work at the Italian Medicine Agency since 2010. I'm currently the chair of the EMA Scientific Advice Working Party. So the working party established by the CHMP and EMA and responsible to provide centralized scientific advice. As you can see here, I have no conflict of interest to declare. Since, as I told you, I'm employee of the Italian Medicine Agency, and I also work as a chair of the EMA Scientific Advice Working Party, I have to make this disclaimer. So this presentation reflects my personal views and do not necessarily reflect the views of IFA, EMA, and HMA. So if it is inaccurate or you don't like, it's all on me. Okay, this is what we're going to talk about in the next 60 minutes or so. I will try to explain what scientific advice provided by regulators is meant for and how it works. I will provide you with some basic information about the legal basis for centralized scientific advice procedure. I will then explain how we work, starting from the role and the composition of the EMA Scientific Advice Working Party, then providing you with some information about procedural steps, timing, interactions with applicant, other working parties, committees. Then I will try to give you some practical examples to explain what is in scope and what is not, just to let you understand the kind of issues we deal with in such procedure. And finally, I will tell you about some other additional tasks of the SOAP, qualification of known methodologies, role in the PRIME scheme eligibility, and some final remarks to understand together whether it's really of benefit, this kind of activities or not. So if you attended the first webinar, you probably already have seen this slide. I just wanted to take this back just to let you remind where scientific advice lies, and also to emphasize the fact that regulators want to play the role of enablers. I mean, we want to keep the pace of innovation and not try not to be the blocking step whenever is possible. So, two keywords here. The first one, we are here to help to find solution, not to create problems. As I said before, we want not to block. And the second keyword is early interaction. As you can see here, the scientific advice can be done at any stage of medicine development, and but the message here, and we will talk about this later on, the earlier this interaction happens and the better it is likely. And the general objective of this activity is to support the development of high quality, effective and safe medicine, and hopefully also increase availability of such medicine for the people. Okay, here again another slide that you might have already seen in the previous webinar, but I found that it illustrates the EU regulatory, the broad EU regulatory network quite efficiently, but I want you to focus on some aspects. The first, as you can see, the EU regulatory network is composed by the national competent authorities of the member states and the European Medicines Agency. Second, important, the EMA decision-making committees and related working parties are composed by delegates from national competent authorities of the member states. And so this system is meant to harmonize the whole process as much as it is possible across EU. Third point that I want to flag to you is we are talking here about scientific advice. Please note that national competent authorities also provide scientific advice at the national level. So the lesson today is focused on centralized scientific advice, but please keep in mind that scientific advice is also given at national level. And interesting information, perhaps, is that a pilot is ongoing for a simultaneous national scientific advice that is somewhat in the middle between a pure national scientific advice and the centralized scientific advice, in which some member states come together to give advice. It is important to flag, perhaps, that if you want to seek questions about the adequacy of a development to support a centralized marketing authorization, perhaps the best way to go is a centralized scientific advice. But there are many good reasons to seek national scientific advice as well in other situations. So I had promised that I give you some basic information about the legal basis of centralized scientific advice. So as you can see here, this is the regulation that probably you very well know, which established the EMA and the centralized procedure for marketing authorization procedure. And as you can see here, among the tasks that the agency must have is to provide advice on the various tests and trials to demonstrate quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products. And also, in this regulation, there is a provision by which the executive director of the agency with the CHMP will establish a standing working party with the sole remit of providing scientific advice. And this is the scientific advice working party that we mentioned before. Again, and this is the last one on the legal basis, but I wanted to flag it to you. And this, as you can see, among the many tasks that the Committee for Advanced Therapies had, what we call CAT, is to contribute to the scientific advice procedure. And we will see later on how this interaction happens. And also, finally, I want to flag you that scientific advice is also done for orphan medicinal product. Interestingly, it is called protocol assistance, which is a way of naming it that might be somewhat confusing, especially for clinicians. You might think something more detailed to the protocol, but in essence is a scientific advice. And another peculiarity here is that there are specific questions related to orphan medicinal product that we will see later on that are about significant benefit, but I will explain it later on. So come back to this previous slide that I showed you before, and I commented just here to flag you a couple of things. Yes, the Scientific Advice Working Party is a working party established of the CHMP. So it's a working party of the CHMP, and it's with the remit to provide scientific advice. Something relatively new that is on this slide, as you can see, just near the point of the yellow arrow, ETF, Rapid Scientific Advice. ETF is the emergency task force, which was initially established during the COVID pandemic, and now is legally established in the context of the regulation on EMA extended mandate, with remit to deal with the emergency and preparedness, including providing scientific advice on related issues. So remember that scientific advice related to issues, to these issues, are provided now by the ETF, just for completeness of information. Okay, now coming from the broad picture before to this one, here you can see that on the top you can see the life cycle of a product, if you wish, and then you can see in the middle regulatory procedure and below committees and working parties. This is to give you a flavor of where the scientific advice is located, so to say, in the life cycles and in comparison with the other committees. As you can see here, very early orphan designation ATMP classification are usually requested by applicants. Scientific advice are usually expected in a pre-submission phase. Of course, there are instances in which for products that are already been approved, a scientific advice might be requested, but generally it is related to issues that will be important from subsequent variation of the marketing authorization or extension of indication or already marketing authorization. So as we will see, and another important information that you have on this slide is this, remember that since, as I explained before, the Scientific Advice Working Party is a working party of the CHMP, scientific advice and protocol assistance are given by the CHMP on the recommendation of the SOAP formally. And most contentious procedures are explicitly discussed at the CHMP every month. Okay, now it's about the SOAP composition. Just to give you an information on how many are and how it is composed. There is one chairperson, currently it's me, and 36 members, among which one vice chairperson and at least one and no more than three from each of the other EMA scientific committees, COMP, PDCO, CAT, and PRAC, so orphan, pediatric, advanced therapy, and pharmacovigilance. Each member has an alternate, and in terms of expertise, as a minimum, the expertise that must be in the SOAP are the one that you see here. They're going from non-clinical to advanced therapies, pediatrics, pharmacokinetics, pharmacoepidemiology, methodology and statistics, and many, the most important disease area that you can see here. But anyway, the SOAP has access to a network of European experts that actively participate or can be involved, and also seeks feedback when needed to other working parties and committees in order to give the highest standard level of assessment in the scientific advice procedures. Okay, so let's move now. What is it all meant for? We talked about the general objective, supporting development, availability of high quality, effective, and safe medicine. But let's see some key features of the scientific advice. First of all, it is a voluntary procedure. Let me add that is because there was a question yesterday on this. There is a fee, and then some also waiver for this fee, depending on some specific topics or applicants. But anyway, it is a voluntary procedure and can be asked alongside the product life cycle, as I mentioned before. The SOAP gives scientific advice responding to specific questions posed by the developer. We will see later on how it works practically, and I will explain to you how the process of peer review and independence of the evaluation and also how to seek the best expertise to be involved here is done. But yeah, the scientific advice reflects the evidentiary standard that the CHMP will apply at the time of the marketing authorization applications. Okay, important concept. Scientific advice is prospective in nature. We do not do any pre-assessment of the results to address possible evaluation of the benefit risk, which is in the sole remit of the CHMP. What we want to look at is at how a medicine should be tested in studies to generate robust evidence, while the assessment at the time of marketing authorization is something that pertains to the marketing authorization procedure and to the CHMP. And this is very important. Another important concept that you have here is scientific advice is not legally binding, on both sides, on both CHMP side and applicant side, medicine developer side. It means that complying with scientific advice usually increases the chances of receiving a positive opinion at the marketing authorization, but it not guarantee it. And the other way around, if you do not comply, this does not prevent the fact that the medicinal product might be approved, and it is important. And we will see later on some numbers about this. Moving on, when scientific advice is most useful, focus on bullet point 1 and 3. And perhaps these are two different instances. In one instance is bullet point 3, you have guidelines, but you want to deviate from them. If duly justified, this might be acceptable, but it's always something that you wish to discuss with the regulators before going this path. But the other issue is when your product is so innovative that guidelines still do not reflect that. And it's normal because guidelines are not always up to date and cannot keep always the pace of innovations. And so this is a very good example in which seeking scientific advice and discussing the plan is really useful. Other examples here, bullet point 2, new or repurposed medicine. And also another good reason is when developers are not so experienced and need some advice. This is especially for academia or no-profit or small medium enterprises. And in these cases, perhaps a very good scientific idea and very good development might be not fully compliant with regulatory requirements. And so this is another very good reason to seek scientific advice. Okay, I had promised that I would have explained to you how does it work in practice. And I think it is important to know that how it works. First of all, the applicant submit the advice request. There is a dedicated platform for this, and there is also a standard format, the briefing document, in which the documentation is provided. And usually there are specific questions and the applicant position, and then the scientific advice working party will react on that. At the validation stage, EMA determines whether the questions are valid or not for scientific advice. Important, for each scientific advice procedure, 2 members of the scientific advice working party are appointed as coordinators. Why is it important? Because this guarantees independent assessment from 2 very independent teams, which provide in a blinded fashion 2 separate first reports. It might be the case that the coordinator's position compared to the applicant proposal is in disagreement or in agreement. It happens sometimes that the two coordinators have different views. What happens next is that the 2 reports are circulated to the whole group, and then in our monthly meeting, every single procedure is discussed at the plenary. And so we seek whether there are some disagreement among members. We try to discuss on scientific grounds and find a common position. When it is needed, we decide whether It is the input of other working parties perhaps is needed on specific issues. But regardless, there is another thing that is decided at the first meeting in which the procedure are discussed. Whether we need to meet the company, the applicant, to discuss their development or no. Usually, if there is full agreement with the applicant's proposal, or perhaps if there is full agreement with minor things that we want to recommend, not substantial, we can draft a final advice letter, which will be adopted by the CHMP at the first CHMP following the SOP meeting. It is the so-called day 40. But if there is a strong disagreement with the company, or if we think that we need to get some more information or more detailed justification about a proposal that has been put on the table, or perhaps we want also to try to propose some alternative way of moving forward, different for the one the company proposed, it's then that we might decide that we wish to meet the company, we wish to meet the applicant to discuss this. So what we do is to prepare a list of issues, which is a very simple document, usually 4-5 pages, in which there is some background information about the product, about the development, which is recapped there. And then a scientific discussion trying to explain what are the most contentious issues that the SOP found in the applicant proposal, and why we do disagree, or why we are not happy with the justification that has been provided. And finally, we have some very specific questions. So please explain why it is. So please consider to do this differently, and things like that. This is sent to the applicant, and the applicant will come at the time of the next SOP meeting, so 30 days later usually, and we will meet the applicant. Usually the coordinators and many members are there, and consider that if in the team of the two coordinators were additional members from were involved, they can be invited to attend the meeting. If a patient representative has been involved, he is also invited to attend the meeting and participate to this meeting. And in this meeting, we discuss the issues with the company. And it's very interesting. Sometimes they change their mind, they come with a different proposal. Sometimes they reach to explain and provide further justification, and they convince us that the fact that their proposal is fine. Sometimes it's somewhat in the middle. But anyway, it is always useful to meet. After this meeting, the procedure, there is a debriefing of the outcome of this meeting in the plenary, and the final advice letter is drafted and sent to the CHMP. Any contentious issues, as I told you before, is explicitly discussed at the CHMP level. So it is about the way we usually work in a very practical way. So let's move on. So let's try now to see what is in scope for a scientific advice and what is out of scope. I will try to give you some flavor about that. So we told that advice can be sought in a prospective manner on quality, as you can see here, manufacturing, chemical, testing, non-clinical. Sometimes we are asked whether some experiments might be waived. Sometimes it is acceptable, sometimes not. And this must be done prospectively in a very timely manner, because otherwise, if you are too advanced in your clinical development and we think that we do not have the necessary information, you should go back, and it's never a good thing. Clinical questions, of course, again, the keyword is prospective. We don't like to discuss about ongoing studies, just to give you a flavor. Of course, there are methodological issues that's often extensively discussed, and also a question about the development on filing strategy, or whether a conditional marketing authorization is something feasible, and what the requirements would be, what the critical issues might be. And as explained, also there is this issue specific for orphan. We will see later on about significant benefit for the maintenance of orphan designation, and some issues about pediatric development. Okay, perhaps this is even too detailed, but just to give some examples of questions or issues that are discussed here, and I would tend to skip and go fast on this, just to remind you that also clinical pharmacology is often extensively discussed, and what we see recently more and more, the use of modeling and simulation is going to be proposed in scientific advice procedure. Probably more interesting to you as oncologists is about clinical efficacy. The most important elements of study design are usually discussed, from the dose finding strategy, the choice of the dose schedule, the endpoint, the trial duration, the control arm, the statistical analysis plan, the target population. So the main features of the study design are usually assessed. Clinical safety, pediatric development, we will see a little bit more later on what is scope and what is not. I promised that I would have explained about the orphan medicinal products and significant benefit. Usually, as you have seen, you might remember, orphan designation happens very early in the development stage, but at the time of marketing authorization, this must be renewed, and it's not given for granted. It's quite complex evaluation, but just here to speak about the significant benefit to maintain the orphan designation at the time of marketing authorization. A clinical superiority over similar orphan products for the same indication must be shown. It is called so-called significant benefit. That might be greater efficacy, usually preferable based on direct comparative studies, but sometimes indirect comparison might be justifiable, much justified and acceptable. Greater safety. Here it's more difficult perhaps to do that without comparative clinical trials. In exceptional cases, neither greater efficacy or safety has been shown, but the medicinal product otherwise makes a major contribution to diagnosis of patient care. For instance, a very different route administration, allowing to target some people that would not be targeted. So, but it's exceptional. So, but just to give you the concept that for orphan medicinal product, very often we discuss this kind of issues in the scientific advice working party. Some example of what is in scope. Based on what I've said before, it's quite easy to understand that this kind of issues when about a prospectively planned study are acceptable. So it is the patient population representative of the target indication that we have. Are the planned measure to assess the benefits acceptable for the CHMP? Is the proposed plan, analysis plan, the statistical analysis plan, okay? Is the study long enough to inform proper benefit risk assessment in the whole population? And also, last bullet point, or is long-term safety appropriately designed? Is the control arm okay? So these are all the kind of questions that are clearly acceptable and in scope for a scientific advice. Let's move to what is out of scope. Compassionate use at EU level is out of scope for the scientific advice. It is for the CHMP to have a look on that. ATMP classification, perhaps you might remember, this is up to the CAT and not something that you wish to ask to the Scientific Advice Working Party. Prime eligibility, I remember, you might remember, I will talk about this, but prime eligibility is also dealt partly at the SOAP, as I will explain later on, but it's not something that should be asked in the context of a scientific advice. The same is for accelerated assessment. When a product is expected to provide a therapeutic advantage, it might seek an accelerated assessment, a shortened time procedure for marketing authorization, but it's not at the SOAP that we decide that, it's at the CHMP level. So it's not out of scope. When it comes to pediatrics, of course, there is an obligation for developers that if they want to develop a product, they should seek the PDCO opinion on whether the studies in children can be waived or deferred, or whether if it's not possible, how the pediatric investigation plan must be done. And so discussing this is for the PDCO, not for the SOAP. Again, if you have agreed a PIP with the PDCO and you want to change, it's not the SOAP that can agree on the changes. This must be agreed at the PDCO level. Of course, there are some instances in which some changes are proposed, and the PDCO always also suggests, okay, seek scientific advice working party advice on that issue and whether they would agree on very specific topics, but then the SOAP will not be the one who will accept or not accept whether a change is accepted. Also, matters of purely regulatory nature, that you do not need to have a scientific advice for that. This you can deal with the EMA. And as I told many times, and I'm not going to repeat, we do not do any pre-assessment of the data. So examples of out-of-scope questions. It's quite intuitive. If you want to know whether this study is good, perhaps you should go to the PDCO, or whether a change because you want to replace an agreed study with a modeling and simulation approach. You should seek the view of the PDCO, and so only them can accept a change to an agreed PIP. Non-clinical data adequate to support the first human study. We can have our view, but anyway, the approval of a clinical trial is in the remit of national competent authority. So perhaps you should go there and submit the data, and it's not up to the SOAP probably to give the last word on that. And then, of course, pre-assessment is out of scope. Okay, transparency. What EMA publishes on outcomes of scientific advice. It is important. Transparency, of course, is always important. During the development and assessment phases, the advice is not published. It's not made public. This is because disclosing information at this stage may undermine research and development efforts. However, since 1st January 2019, Information about scientific advice is made available in the EPA and the public assessment report after the marketing authorization. And there you will find the key elements of the EMA's advice and whether or not the developer complied with this advice. So this kind of information is made available. By the way, this is part of the assessment report, which is circulated during the CHMP procedure for marketing authorization. Important information is that during a public health emergency, EMA published a list of medicines that have received advice, formal or informal, from CHMP and ETF, the Emergency Task Force, you might remember. And the full advice can be made available upon request. So emergency is a very special situation. Okay, now some numbers. How many procedures do we do yearly? You can see here, in 2022, we had 833 procedures, more or less in line with the previous year. You might notice that the number of scientific advice related to COVID were much less, and also around 20% less than advice or protocol assistance, advice to orphan medicinal products. But more or less, you have an idea of the numbers. We have 11 meetings in a year, so it's and we deal with the 830 procedure. Okay, by applicants, as you can see here, most of the scientific advice are requested by medium-large pharmaceutical companies. In 2022, SMEs were 18% of the total request, which is more or less in line with what we observed across the years. But therapeutic area, acknowledging that it's difficult to read this one, but as you can see here, oncology, I flagged it for you. It's not the most common, but among the most common ones. And in terms of topics, quality, preclinical, and clinical, as you can see, clinical is present in most of the advice. In 2022, 51% of scientific advice had questions related to clinical issues. So it is important for you perhaps to know in case you will consider to contribute to this kind of activity. And now I want to talk very briefly about some interactions that we have and scientific advice that we provide in parallel with other regulatory agencies or stakeholders. In this case, it's the parallel scientific advice with the HTA bodies. And it is important that it happens at early stage, and it's about the evidence to be generated during pre-approval studies to meet the needs of respective decision makers. And this is important to facilitate patient access to new medicine. I wanted to put you this slide here, just to perhaps you have seen in the previous webinar maybe, and the message here is that with marketing authorization is not the end in its own. And for benefit of patients and to improve the real access to new medicine, it's really important to get in connection with HTA bodies as early as possible, because if not reimbursed, the medicine is likely not widely available. And we will have a lot of examples about this. Important to address this, the regulation of health technology assessment, which entered into force in January 2022 and applies as of January 2025. Established that a cooperation between EMA and HTA bodies must be put in place for joint clinical assessment of results, for joint scientific consultation, read it as a scientific advice, and identification of emerging health technologies. So important information is that in this transition period, a new framework for parallel EMA HTA scientific advice has been agreed. And so in this period, developers can request the involvement of HTA bodies when applying for EMA scientific advice. The outcome will be a scientific advice letter from EMA and individual written recommendation for participating HTA bodies. Important to mention the fact that during the procedure, there are interaction between HTA bodies and regulators in order to discuss the most contentious issues, and perhaps whenever it is possible to find agreement between regulators and HTA bodies, and also between HTA bodies among themselves. So it is important because as much as it is possible to find a common grounds, yeah, it is always better, and probably it will facilitate in the end the access to drugs. Candidates criteria for assessing this parallel scientific advice with HTA bodies: unmet medical need, first in class, potential impacts on patients and public health or healthcare systems, cross-border dimension, union-wide added value. So there is a view that to a maximum prioritize what is important at the EU level. In this regard, oncology products and the ATMPs and indication where these now established guidance are given a preferred consideration. Another interesting interaction that we have is the parallel scientific advice with the FDA. So there's a mechanism to concurrently exchange views with sponsor and the regulatory agency, and the aim is to increase the dialogue between the two agencies and developers and avoid, whenever it is possible, unnecessary replication of testing or the use of diverse approach across the Atlantic, which is never a good thing to do. This is not the only kind of interaction we try to have with FDA, and everything can be improved. So we are working on that. But just to give you the flavor that this is something that is ongoing and on our attention. I want to mention this pilot project on medicine repurposing. This is something which is high on priority for the Commission, and something about repurposing is also in the new proposal for the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. But here is a pilot project to give support to non-profit organizations and academics on repurposing authorized medicine. The aim is to help to generate enough evidence to support a new indication for medicine whose marketing authorization holder are unlikely to undertake the necessary research. Fees are waived for eligible academic sponsors, and the kind of support that is given is not just the scientific support in the Scientific Advice Working Party, but also from the EMA, from the regulatory side. And this gives me also the chance to emphasize one thing that I perhaps didn't mention before, that the whole work of the EMA Scientific Advice Working Party is supported by the EMA Secretariat. It's not only support from the administrative issues, but also very high level support on the scientific perspective, and handling also all the interaction with the committees and the other working parties at a very high scientific level of support. So I wanted to acknowledge that. Okay. Let me check. Okay, we have still some time, and I wanted so to show you some additional tasks that are on the SOAP, which I think are very important ones. One is the qualification of normal methodologies. When a new method can be applied to the research and development, it can be to non-clinical or to clinical studies, so it can be a novel biomarker. We are seeing a lot of application also based on digital technologies and the potential to derive some prognostic characteristics, or to use it as a support for the evaluation of the benefit and to support to be used as primary endpoint. So when it is meant to be used in the clinical development to support the marketing authorization, we can qualify this kind of methods. And this is a process that is very complex in the fact that it involves a lot of people, a lot of expertise, a lot of efforts, also from the regulatory side, but also on the side of the applicants, of course. And it is true. And it's also a process that has a high level of transparency, I would say, because once an applicant submits a documentation to support the qualification of a novel methodology, this is thoroughly assessed. This is a qualification team, very wide, and this is discussed thoroughly with the applicant. And if a qualification opinion can be drafted, this is discussed with the CHMP, and then the outcome is published on the EMA website and for public consultation. So it's very open to scientific scrutiny and discussion from the whole world. And then comments are taken in full consideration and rediscussed at the CHMP, depending on the level of comments and how they impact on the initial qualification opinion. And then the final qualification opinion is published on the EMA website. And this is for the benefit of the whole community to know that a methodology is being qualified and is acceptable to be used in the context of clinical development. Sometimes we see earlier, so not yet mature to be qualified, and so we provide advice on protocols and methods intended to develop this novel methodology. And when the whole thing seems very promising, although cannot be qualified, a letter of support can be drafted and also made public. And this is aimed to encourage data sharing and to facilitate studies aimed at eventual qualification. Okay, I skipped this one this was just to give you a flavor of how long and complex it is. You can see how many times it comes to the SOAP and then to the CHMP and this public consultation. So I explained a little bit before. You do not need to know much more than that, but just to give you a flavor. And also, if you are interested on the EMA website, you can find information about this qualification or no methodology. This is a not up-to-date and not exhaustive list of qualification opinion released, and also here the same you find for the letter supported where published on the EMA website. So I really, if you're into this, I encourage you to go on the EMA website. Okay, priority medicine scheme, PRIME scheme. PRIME is a scheme that was set up in 2016. It's run by the EMA to enhance the support and development for the development of medicine that target unmet medical need. This is a voluntary scheme which is then based on enhanced interaction, early appointment of rapporteur, early dialogue with the developers to optimize development, and possibly with the aim to speed evaluation at the time of marketing authorization and have an accelerated procedure. SOAP is involved in the assessment of the prime eligibility request. Usually, this is the first forum in which the eligibility requests are discussed, and then the SOAP recommendation goes to the CHMP that makes the final decision on eligibility, of course. And for ATMPs, this always also go to the CAT, the Committee for Advanced Therapies. To be eligible to PRIME, the target condition must represent an unmet medical need, but the product also must have the potential to address the unmet medical need to a significant extent and able to bring a major therapeutic advantage to patients. So ideally, we want to see initial results. Ideally, we want to have in the PRIME scheme products that are not too advanced in their development, but if the preliminary data are quite convincing that it might bring a major therapeutic advantage to patients, yeah, these products might be eligible to the PRIME scheme. And it is something that requires from the regulatory side much more efforts. And so it is important that we bet on the right players here. Okay, I skip this one. I think that I told you the most important things about the PRIME, just to give you a flavor about that. Last slides about the impact of scientific advice. This is a paper that was published in 2015, but I think that it's very clear to read, and things are not changed that much. As you can see here, these authors analyzed a total of more than 100 scientific advice submission and subsequent assessment of the marketing authorization and application and the outcome. As you can see here, in some cases, what was proposed at the time of the SAP was acceptable for the SOAP CHMP. In some instances, it was not. In 97% of those for which we had agreed the initial proposal were compliant with the initial proposal, did not make changes. As you can see here, the outcome at the positive outcome at the marketing authorization application was very high when they were compliant, 84%. But nevertheless, even if they were compliant, 16% had a negative opinion. So key message here, if you are compliant, this is not guarantee that you will have a positive opinion at the time of the marketing authorization. And the same here is when you see that those that made changes based on our advice, anyway, 14%, regardless the fact that they changed their development to comply with what we suggested, had a negative opinion. But the other way around is that if you are not compliant, your chance to have a positive opinion is lower, quite half, I would say, based on this data. But nevertheless, there were positive opinion even for those that were not compliant. So it is important to say that even if you do not comply, we are not going to say that, okay, it's you did not listen to us, we don't want to accept that. No, of course it's not. And so, but the chances of a positive outcome are significantly reduced. Here you can find the non-exhaustive and non-up-to-date list of publication relevant for these topics in case you are interested. This takes to my last slide. So we can say that overall, receiving scientific advice, protocol assistance, and being compliant increases the chance of a successful development and the availability of high quality and safe medicine for the benefit of patients. So applicants should be encouraged to seek for scientific advice and protocol assistance, and these are the most important reason when early in development or when you're taking go-no-go decision in the critical steps, or when not complying with previous scientific advice that you are going to change, you are not complying with the guidelines, or there are no guidelines available, as we said before. So there are many good reasons for which you are encouraged to come for early interaction, because this offers the opportunity to impact on future development and having a positive outcome at the marketing authorization application. So this is the very last slide, just to remind what we talked about. The overall objective maybe is what we said also in the last slide: the benefit for patients and the high effective and safe products. The legal basis I explained, how the SOAP is a working party of the CHMP, how it is placed in the context of the product life cycle and the regulatory network, and the scientific advice, what is meant for, what is scope, what is not, how this works in practice, some numbers, other tasks that we do, qualification on our methodology, role and prime scheme, and final remarks. Does the scientific advice really provide benefit? Yeah, we think so. Perhaps someone might disagree, but we think it is like that. So with this, I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention. And I guess that we are perfectly in time. Okay, thank you very much.